I'm going to switch internet connections and see if this helps what I'm doing right now. Okay, well, all right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to do this Piedmont seminar with me and Cameron. It was interesting putting, hey, wait, Nebbiolo Seminar. Next week, I think I'm going to do Piedmont and do everything that is not, that's not Nebbiolo. But this week.
You only have an hour for that?
What was that?
You only have an hour for that?
Right, I know. Yeah, well, I try to set myself like ambitious targets to keep try and keep myself in line.
Sure.
So Nebbiolo, I think even from like the very, beginning when I started getting into wine, when I was in the wine business as a teenager, just learning about everything, right from the very beginning, from the get-go, Nebbiolo had this reputation, had this like I put in the handout here, it has this like mystical sort of like reputation. Like people talk about it like, ooh, Nebbiolo, similar to Pinot Noir and Burgundy, and people compare Nebbiolo to Pinot Noir and Burgundy, and that's okay. People can do whatever they want. It is interesting. I guess there are some reasons for it, and it is a useful tool anyway. So Nebbiolo, part of what's interesting about it, Nebbiolo comes, it's this like legendary grape that produces expensive, sought after wines, and yet Nebbiolo is really only grown basically in Piedmont, in northwest Italy, right here. So this is all of northwest Italy. This whole like part around here is Piedmont, and a lot of the like what we're talking about today, like serious Nebbiolo, comes from right down in here. Barolo, Barbaresco, right down here around Alba, you have the Roero Hills and stuff like that. But then there are also these regions up here, Brahmatera, Gemme, Gattinara, Collina Novarese overlaps them, but not specifically really Nebbiolo. And we also have a wine from Valtellina up here, which is Lombardy. But Nebbiolo is this famous grape that makes these like really sought after, wines, and there really isn't any Nebbiolo to speak of that's grown other places in the world. Like there's a few people experimenting in California and stuff like that, but there isn't great exciting Nebbiolo coming from anywhere other than this corner of Italy, and that is, it just makes me wonder. It makes me wonder why. This is where Nebbiolo is from. Here. I don't know if people know exactly where it came from, but most famously, it's from Barolo and Barbaresco. And when I do these seminars, I like talking about sort of the background history and the culture of the place, because I feel like the history influences the culture, and the culture influences the wine and stuff. It's all a product of each other. So I'm going to run through this quickly. Cameron, feel free to jump in and disagree or agree, or add anything, any stories or whatever you have that you feel like matter or are relevant to this.
Well, just a preview of what Piedmont Guy might pull off one day, but we think that Nebbiolo originated in the Valle Osolane up in northern Piedmont, and there are a grand total of 5 producers up there right now, only one of which is imported. So we've got our eye on it, because it's a bit like the story that we'll get into with Gattinara, long lost region, hopefully to be restored. And we would love to, partner with one of those newbies if the time comes one day.
I feel like that's a conversation that we should have, like, as we're tasting the wines, as the Gattinara and stuff, that like the comparison of like the wealth of Barolo and Barbaresco, and then like the poverty essentially of some of like all these other places in Piedmont that produce Nebbiolo that get a fraction of the attention that Barolo and Barbaresco get. It's I sort of touch on it in here, but anyway, so Piedmont. Uh, Piedmont, it sometimes is referred to, or in the past has been referred to as the Piedmont. There is a the that gets attached to it. And that is really interesting to me because, you know, that's not normal proper grammar, but the gets attached historically to places, geographical locations around the world that are sort of that are frontiers that border other places that sort of like have a history of being fought over or changing possession. Think of the other places that are described as the. You have Le Marche in Italy, the Marche, which translates as the Marches. It was a place like surrounded by mountains that was then like more accessible, and you had different cultures sort of like in conflict there. You had people from like the Veneto from Venice in the north. You had the Papal States and Rome in the south. You had the Byzantines, stuff like that. The Ukraine has always basically been sort of like pulled back and forth between Russia, between like the Persians, between like whatever the dominant power was in like sort of Southeast Asia or the Middle East there. The Ukraine has always been like pulled back and forth, and Piedmont has sort of a similar history, not so much recently, but Piedmont originally it was like inhabited by pre-Celtic tribes. The Romans conquered it, and then it basically became Rome's frontier. Turin was a Roman colony and then a province, and then beyond Turin, it was that actually was southern Gaul, was what the Romans considered it. So it was the frontier of Rome, and then after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, just literally everybody invaded Piedmont one after another, like the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Lombards, the I don't even know, the Burgundians.
Napoleon.
Yeah, then them too, but all even the Saracens, Saracen pirates like came up and raided it. The Moors, you had pirates from North Africa. The Magyars from Asia Minor raided it. Like it was kicked around basically. It was like a football that was kicked around and cut up and belonged to a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures. A lot of different people fought over it. It was in 10 something. Where did I put that? It's in here somewhere. I want to say it's 1064 that Otto of Savoy. Oh, here we go. Yep, 1046, Otto of Savoy. So Savoy, now called the Savoie, just across the border in France. Savoy was named for the House of Savoy. So Otto of Savoy took possession of, I want to say it was Alba, so not all of Piedmont, but part of it. And then slowly, the House of Savoy expanded their control of Piedmont. There were all the different like cities like Asti and Montferrat and stuff were still independent at that time, but the House of Savoy kept sort of slowly expanding. So they had come from what is today southern France originally, but in 1563 they moved their capital to Turin. And I think it was before then. I want to say it was in like the 1400s. Originally, it was like the County of Savoy, and then it became the Duchy of Savoy. So they were sort of like elevated in European aristocracy to becoming dukes. And then at one point, through marriage, they they had a claim to the throne of Sicily, but they traded that to the House of Aragon, I think, in return for the crown of Sardinia. And Sardinia had been its own independent kingdom for long enough that it was considered a quote unquote kingdom. So whoever was the aristocrat in possession of Sardinia got to use the title king. And that elevated the House of Savoy within Europe and within the Holy Roman Empire. Then the House of Savoy, whoever was the head of the house was a king, and they had their capital in Turin, and they were called King of Sardinia. But they sort of explicitly, they tried to call themselves like King of Sardinia and Piedmont, or King of like, because even though they were only king because they owned Sardinia, no one really wanted Sardinia, and they never actually visited Sardinia. So they tried to keep on making it clear to everybody that like they were actually kings of Piedmont, because Piedmont was the seat of their power. I should have said Piedmont is, I want to say it's the geographically, like by land mass, I think it's the third largest province in Italy. It might be the second largest, and I think it's the second largest provincial economy in Italy currently today. But that's how it's always been. Like Piedmont is a large area with a fertile climate. Anyway, so House of Savoy, they become kings of Sardinia, and go through the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon invades, and they sort of like retreat to Sardinia, and then they come back and make a bunch of treaties with everybody and stuff like that. But they held on to power in Piedmont and were restored after the Napoleonic Wars. And then it was in, I don't remember when, Victor Emmanuel. So Victor Emmanuel II, king of Italy, started out king of Sardinia and Piedmont. Like the rest of the House of Savoy, he was sort of like continuing their drive to consolidate power in Italy and take over more territory. He supported, well, he actually first, he joined the Crimean War, not because he cared about the Crimea or Russia, but as a way to ingratiate himself with the British Empire and the French, Napoleon III. So Italy joined the Crimean War, or the Piedmont Sardinia joined the Crimean War and went and fought the Russians, so that then when the war was over, they had a seat at the table, and Victor Emmanuel and his prime minister, the Count of Cavour, could negotiate and got France to support the House of Savoy in taking Lombardy from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then eventually conquering the Veneto and Venice as well and stuff like that. So it was this, so that happened, and that was like a big step on the way towards Italian unification. And then Victor Emmanuel II supported Garibaldi in going and invading Sicily, and then springboarding from Sicily, going to Campania and Naples, and sort of destabilizing and overthrowing the southern kingdom of the two Sicilies. And then Garibaldi handed over control of the southern kingdom to Victor Emmanuel, and Victor Emmanuel became the first king of Italy, and it sort of unified Italy. But it's really interesting, like looking at the House of Savoy in comparison to Sicily and the Normans, the D'Hautevilles that we were talking about over the past couple of weeks with Mount Etna and Sicily, because the Normans, the D'Hautevilles, like come in out of nowhere, conquer Sicily. They're like a hurricane coming through. They conquer Sicily, Campania, all of this stuff, and their kingdom only lasts like 100 years. The House of Savoy is more this like slow, like horse trading, like trading baseball cards, like slowly maneuvering, marrying other people, slowly working their way up until eventually they end up being kings of Italy. And this matters because Piedmont was the seat of their power for, 800 years, basically, and was attached to parts to their possessions in southern France and in southern Sicily. So Piedmont, culturally was attached to southern France, to these other places, and was very much like looking towards Northern Europe, and associated also with like their relations with the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the French and stuff like that. So Piedmont is Italy, but Piedmont also is like in a way much more Northern European. Piedmont has its own very strong identity, and also is more sort of like Northern European, like has a lot in common with like the other Alpine countries of Switzerland and those parts of France that are in the Alps. Also, people talk about Barolo as the king of the wine of kings and the king of wines. And that is because of Barolo's specific association with the House of Savoy, with Victor Emmanuel II and his father, Carlo Albert. It was the Count of Cavour, Victor Emmanuel's prime minister, who hired a French enologist, Louis Odart, back in like the 1850s, to go and modernize his vineyards in Barolo. Because, okay, up until then, Barolo made primarily sweet red wines. So Count of Cavour hires this French enologist from Bordeaux to come and try to improve his vineyards and make wine that he actually wanted to drink and stuff like that. And he did that. He brought a lot of techniques from Bordeaux. And also then another like local noblewoman also hired Louis Odart once he was there, and had him start working on her vineyards, and had him make a like Bordeaux styled wine for her, that then she that through her, the king Carlo Albert was exposed to it, and he was like, wow, geez, I didn't know that there was such great wine made here in my province of Piedmont, here in this place Barolo. And so he founded he set up a royal wine estate at Fontana Freda in Barolo to make wine for the House of Savoy and stuff like that, and like built a, I don't know, chateau, like castle there and stuff. And it was a possession of the king of the House of Savoy. So that's part of why Barolo is associated with the House of Savoy and that influence on it. I'm going to start talking about Nebbiolo. And so Nebbiolo is a relatively later ripening grape. Generally, at least around like Langhe and the Alba, it ripens in October, which is, on the late side for the area, because Piedmont, when you look at it on a map, it's relatively north. Like you have the Alps around it, but here, so you have this like plain here. This is more like flat land, hills here. Then you have mountains all around it, and that helps shelter it. So Piedmont has pretty hot summers, but then it gets cold quickly, and they have cold winters. And so historically, winemakers had a hard time fully fermenting Nebbiolo, because Nebbiolo was ripening late, being harvested late, had a fair amount of sugar to it. And that was why sweet wine was getting made. It took more modern winemaking for people to figure out how to like reliably always ferment it dry, and like modern sort of Barolo to be created. That was Louis Odart back in the 1850s. Oh, right. Nebbiolo is also an early flowering grape, so it's susceptible to late frosts from the winter. So you also have to be really careful of where you plant it. Planting it somewhere that's like at high enough elevation where there won't be a lot of moisture in the air to kill it with frosts.
Essentially, of any red grape in Piedmont, it's hanging out there, subject to the elements, longer than anything else. So more things could go wrong than in any other case.
Yeah, it really, like reading about it, it sounds like a prima donna of grapes. It's late ripening, it's early flowering, it's very expressive, it's kind of like temperamental, and Oh, and it's productive in all of the like leaves, shoots, like greenery, like Nebbiolo compared to some other grape varieties. It takes more vineyard work to keep the vines like producing grapes instead of just growing more and more branches and leaves and, you know, growing the plant, which is not what you want for wine. So that pretty much covers my background on Piedmont and Nebbiolo. Cameron, let's start talking more specifically about wine.
Yeah. Well, I won't try to out the history you just gave. That was awesome. I think the framework I might lend before we talk about the specific wines is why would you create a company like ours that's centered on Nebbiolo, and how to make sure that really the heart and soul of this grape is translated to not just, you know, the super geeks that are on the Zoom call, but to anyone and everyone. And we spend a lot of time trying to capture that. Words don't quite do it justice, but I'd like you to think as we taste through these wines about the sort of tension that's wrapped up in these wines, the high acid, the high tannin, the great dry extract, the things that make Nebbiolo Nebbiolo. And I think when it's at its absolute best, there's this purity of fruit and this fineness of tannin and an essence that can't be replicated, hasn't really been replicated outside of Northwest Italy. When you think about all the Nebbiolo planted in the world, 85% of it rests in Piedmont still to this day. And like Ned said, it's a transmitter of place, just like Pinot Noir. So has anyone else planted it outside of Piedmont? Yes. But has anyone made it their identity, their lifeblood like Piedmont has? I don't know. We focus as an importer just on Piedmont. So that's kind of the framework, just so you understand, you know, what we wake up for every morning and what we're after. Ned, I'll let you steer. I mean, I'd love to chime in quite a bit on the wines, but I'll kind of let you steer. Do you have the bottles too? To
Yeah, I have all the bottles over here with me. Yeah. Yeah, Barolo. I guess I wrote a bunch here about Barolo because I feel like Barolo and I'm lumping in Barbaresco because Barbaresco is right next door. But Barolo is so famous, like that Barolo is wrapped up with the fortunes of Nebbiolo, that like Nebbiolo in a way is famous because Barolo became famous. And like because Louis Odart like came to Barolo and changed winemaking there and stuff. And a lot of Barolo is the yardstick that all these other Nebbiolo producers, to some extent, for better or worse, are all judged against. You know, but you know, why don't we just jump into tasting the wines and talking about them?
Yeah, I'd love to. We should talk Barbaresco for a while. It's a great passion of mine, and when we get there, I'd love to chime in on why it should be celebrated even more than it is.
Yeah. Okay, so first wine. So Luigi Giordano. Is this Longe? Okay, Longe Rosso.
Longe Rosso, yeah. So this is not a Longe Nebbiolo, primarily because it's not at least 85% Nebbiolo. So that would be the DOC rule. This became a DOC in 1960, but the Giordanos were already making their own Longe Rosso. So the don't ask, don't tell part of this wine is that it's not all red wine. This is a cepage of 80 Nebbiolo, 20 Arnais. It's a co-ferment. It is an absolute unicorn. There is no other Longe Rosso produced in Barbaresco or Barolo that's co-fermented with a white grape. I would love to show you where it comes from. Ned, do I have permission to?
Yeah,
share the screen, yeah? I'm disabled.
You should be able to now.
I'm no longer disabled.
Great.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. So just to give you a sense, this is an aerial shot of Barbaresco. You have the Tower of Barbaresco right about here. I love this shot because you can see this dramatic separation. Here's the Tonero River right here, separating Barbaresco from the Roero. And we'll talk Roero here in a minute, but you can see just how different that landscape is over there. I think of Barbaresco and Barolo as like the Disneyland and Disney World of Piedmont, highly manicured, over 90% planted with grapes where you could plant grapes. And right in the heart of this village, you have 800 people at most. You have Gaia right about here, and then you have Luigi Giordano right next to them. And they started as a grower for Gaia. So the beauty of this is you have this incredibly humble family that's been connected to Nebbiolo since the 1930s. Bear in mind that Barbaresco only stretches back to the 1890s, historically speaking. And basically they sold the Gaia for a few decades. And then in the 50s, what makes this wine really fascinating for me is they borrowed an idea from the Roero, which is to take a little bit of Arnase, and in this case, quite a bit of Arnase, and co-ferment it with Nebbiolo. And when we talk about, Ned did an amazing job of talking about the history, this sort of the historicity, Barolo came first, Barbaresco came second, Roero came third. And in a lot of ways, there's a hierarchy there. A lot of Roero producers wish to make wine in the vein of Barbaresco and Barolo. A lot of Barbaresco producers wish to make Barolo and do. Not many Barolo producers seek to make Barbaresco. There's a bit of a thinking there of perhaps one is higher than the other, whether that's realized or not by the producers. And so you have something that's really atypical, which is this historical Barbaresco house taking its cue from the Roero. And yeah, it's not 100% legal, but if you don't advertise it, then why not throw 20% Arnase into your Longue Rosso? It is low alcohol, chillable, crushable red. We will do everything we can as an importer to keep expanding that category, in this world of Beaujolais that we occupy these days, these lighter bodied, crushable, chillable red wines. We think Piedmont generally, and Barbaresco in particular, has a lot of expressions that can kind of fit into that. So think younger vines. I'll show you where the vineyard comes from. So this is, again, kind of an aerial shot. I love this as well because it gives you another sense of, yeah, they've planted pretty much everything they can. There used to be hazelnut trees. There used to be alternative sources of agriculture. The sort of things that you can still find in the Roero, you don't see much of in Barbaresco because, the price of Nebbiolo just continues to climb. It's like buying Bitcoin these days, So in this corner down here, you'll see a single vineyard called Ronchi, and then the highlighted parcels are where they source from. So what blows my mind, and I know Ned's done an awesome job in the past of highlighting these wines on Instagram. This is all Barbaresco fruit. This is fruit that could go into a Barbaresco and sell for much more. But we still have families like the Giordanos who make wines like this on principle. Like they don't drink Barbaresco every night at dinner, and they don't necessarily want the world to see them that way. They want these sort of everyday, if you're a local, you open this on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then you drink Barbaresco on a special or festive occasion. So love this wine for that reason. One more shot here. We've got young generation taking over. So three this is something I think a lot about in the US. You know, I'm based in Portland, Oregon, tons of great winemaking out here, but normally when you talk about winemaking in Oregon, it's centered on one generation, maybe two. And in Barbaresco and Barolo, I mean, we have conversations at times about this wine goes 7 generations back already. And in this case, you've got Luigi still around in his 80s, still very involved. His daughters run the show, and then Matteo is still in his 20s and is this, in my mind, this pathway to the future. This guy who wants to make still Nebbiolo Rosé, unlike many other producers who make sparkling Method Champenoise Rosé, all out of Nebbiolo. So he's really spun the winery in a really fun direction. And he's standing next to the sort of barrel that we love to see when we drink these wines. You know, we've already talked a little bit about high acid, high tannin. The thinking that we really buy into, and that a lot of classic or call them traditional houses buy into, is don't mess that up. Don't over extract that. And certainly don't put it in a brand new toasted oak barrique. The idea here is to age in these old Slavonian barrels brought from Croatia historically to the northeast, and you know, brought from that direction to avoid the Alps to the northwest. And they still have quite a bit of Slavonian oak in Piedmont, and this is one of them that he's standing next to.
That actually, to me, that's an interesting, I don't know, like segue. You were saying that Barolo, you know, people in Barbaresco want to make Barolo to some extent, and then like winemakers in Barolo, you know, they just want to make Barolo. But I think there was a time, right, when Barolo wanted to make like Saint Emilion or Pomerol or like Napa. You know, like back in the like 80s, maybe early 90s. There was that revolution in Barolo, or like there were winemakers in Barolo who, you know, who like started using new oak barriques from Bordeaux and stuff like that, and like limiting their yields in the vineyard even more to make the grapes even more concentrated, and like doing really gentle macerations with rotary fermenters and stuff like that to try to make like big lush red wines, you know, in the age of Robert Parker, and get high Robert Parker scores and stuff like that.
Yeah, they even went one step further. You might call it like grape genocide. I mean, they sought to eliminate Nebbiolo biotypes that were low in anthocyanins. So, you know, some of these fascinating, really light in hue, quick to turn this sort of like rust or orange color clones of Nebbiolo went the way of the dinosaur, and they never really shifted back. But fortunately, they stopped doing a lot of the things you're talking about in the cellar. So we do now have these wines like you're drinking, right? If anyone's not super familiar with Nebbiolo and you're curious as to whether the bottling you're drinking is 100%, you can always hold this to the light or to a sheet of paper and see whether you can look through it and whether it resembles to a certain degree Pinot Noir. And that's certainly what we look for when we go hunting for great Nebbiolo.
Yeah, I should have. It's just really delicious, and I wasn't paying attention, and I drank most of it. But I should talk about what it actually smells and tastes like quickly.
Yeah, please be my guest.
It's really beautiful. It has like a beautiful. So Nebbiolo classically has flavors and aromas that are both like beautiful, arrogant, like elegant floral aromatics, and then it can also at the same time have like deep, dark, tarry, powerful, like, you know, muscular aromas and like woodsy, like savory flavors all at the same time. And this, like, because of how it's made, and you know, I don't know like what they're doing like yield wise or when they're harvesting and stuff, but co-fermented with Arnase, certainly like this is definitely, it smells like Nebbiolo to me, but it's like the prettier face of Nebbiolo. It's like, it smells more like floral, sort of I don't know. a little bit like roses, but also sort of like really fresh cherries, raspberry. But it still has great structure on the palate. There's a saltiness that like gets my palate and like makes me start salivating and stuff. It's not a really tannic wine, but it does have this awesome like salty structure to it that that's something that I do associate with Nebbiolo.
Yeah, and I mean it's unique in that we have the Arnais to thank for softening the tannin of Nebbiolo. So, yeah. I mean, if there's anyone thinking about the more pragmatic, like the romantic tasting notes are great, but sometimes I even have to start, especially like in my neck of the woods, with people who are super trained on Pinot, and I wouldn't necessarily take them from Pinot right into the world of Barolo. I'd start them here and kind of see where it goes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Gattinara.
Gattinara. You mind if I take over the screen again?
Sure.
So this is a dramatically different place. Actually, if you'll humor me, I think we should look at a zoomed out map. This is just, this is something we had a buddy of ours sketch out just so you can see sort of where our producers are on a map of Piedmont. So we just tasted, I can zoom in here a bit. We just tasted right here from Barbaresco, and it's an amazing drive to go just 90 minutes northeast to an area called Gattinara and find yourself in a totally different landscape. So we're talking in Barbaresco, very structured soils, marl, calcareous soils, limestone. But up in Gattinara, you have this really unique opportunity to taste 100% pure volcanic soils. It's a unique zone in that way. Here's a good shot of Monte Rosa in the background. So effectively in the foreground, you're tasting the last of the Piemontese fruit to the south. And then if you were to hop over that mountain, you'd be in Aosta, Val d'Aosta. This co-op goes way back. Ned, I want you to chime in because you've done an amazing job of promoting this winery in Maine. This is unique in our book. We have always partnered with a single family when we sought wineries out, but in the back of our mind, we thought to ourselves, if there were ever an opportunity to find a cooperativa, a co-op, that's truly the lifeline to the surrounding community of any of these little zones in Piedmont, we would jump on it. And about a year ago, we had an opportunity to partner with effectively the co-op of Gattinara. And this is a body, really, an administrative body, to de-romanticize it, that pulls the fruit in from 40 tiny little growers who don't have enough fruit to make their own wine. And they put out a whopping 2,000 cases of wine a year. So it's
right. I mean, the average vineyard size that they have is less than an acre. Exactly. It's like it's people with like vineyards that are the size of like gardens. So yeah, it's way too small for them to make a commercial product from it.
And the beauty of that is they treat their vineyards like gardens. And I think that the sadness of it was that for over 100 years, no one wanted to drink from those gardens, so to speak.
But they did.
Yeah, exactly.
They wanted to, and that's why they treated them like a garden, and that's why we have this Vino Rosso that is like
exactly
a wine made for them to drink there at the winery there in the town.
So yeah, I mean, I guess, back to the history for a second. These wines were prized. They were valued much higher than things like Barolo and Barbaresco purely because Barolo and Barbaresco didn't exist until the mid 1800s. So you had folks like Napoleon and Thomas Jefferson writing about places like Gattinara and Costa della Sezia and Gemme, and not Barolo and Barbaresco quite yet. So the history runs deep. The wines fetched a high price. They say higher than Burgundy at one point in the 1800s from Gattinara. And then all the wheels came off pretty darn quickly. You had a hailstorm in 1905 that set the region way back. And imagine an area that's trying to get back on its feet, runs into World War I, runs into the worst of phylloxera to hit Piedmont between the World Wars, then runs into World War II. And by the end, everyone had it. I think we could all sympathize. Like, you know, we've been through 1 year of a pandemic and it feels tough. Imagine going through decades of hardship. And, you know, most of the people left. They say that this went from 600 hectares in the early 1900s down to far less than 100. We're inching back up to 100 because people like us, everyone on this call, I think we appreciate small, thoughtful production. And so there's increasingly a desire for it, and people are bouncing back. But, you know, for a while, a lot of these folks were forced to leave for Torino or for Milano for factory jobs. And now that we're back in it and seeing farmers come back to the land and plant more grapes, it's inspiring to be partnered with a co-op that never really stopped. You know, they saw the ebb and the flow, but they've put out a vintage since 1908. And what we're tasting is not the Gattinara. I know Ned has some of that in-house. I'm sure he does. But this is their little Rosso. This is what all those farmers would come to drink at the co-op. The fruit of their labor, so to speak. I'll show you the cellar here. Pretty great shot. So this is it's like 60% Nebbiolo, 30% Barbera, 5% Valtellina, 5% Uvarara. So think the structure, the purity, the tension of Nebbiolo, the high acid, the supple fruit of Barbera, the spice of Valtellina, the fleshiness of Uvarara. I'm just making those numbers up, by the way. They will never tell us their secret recipe. So they're pulling fruit from all around, from Gattinara and Gemme and a couple other villages, co-fermenting it. Is an old school field blend. If you're there in Piedmont, you're probably not even drinking it out of a bottle. You're drinking it out of a demijohn or whatever you want to fill your bucket with, really. This is a good shot of the cellar. The cellar has not really been updated. So when you walk down into this cavernous place, this cellar, you still see old cement tanks and these what are called tini. So these are upright barrels where they ferment the Gattinara. I'll show you one more here. And this is the man. I know when we first brought these wines in, Ned pinged me, who's really curious about how this works. But, you know, basically there's a council of all these growers, all these farmers, and they vote together, they vote democratically, and then they have this dude, Franco, make the wine. He's the president. He kind of carries out the vision, but it's very much group decision making. And yeah, let me turn it over to you, Ned, for a minute.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is a good. Let me get back to, here we go. The story of Gattinara is also like, that's a good example story of these other small regions up here in northern Piedmont that have been through a lot of similar, like a similar situation. So talking about like Boca, Gemme, Brahmatera, like they all went through that same, like the two world wars and what that did to agriculture up here in northern Piedmont, and all of them at the same time are like slowly trying to put things back together and rebuild and come back now.
I know it's one of the, if any of you make it or have been, it's one of the most haunting things you can do is to drive this sort of axis along Alto Piemonte and see how the forest has reclaimed a lot of these vineyards on the hillsides. But it's hopeful too. I hope a lot of people come back now.
This smells more like woodsy, more wild. I mean, there's still a lot of fruit. Like I smell like ripe cherry fruit from it. But at the same time, it's also like there's a little bit of like a spicy, like aromatic herbal thing to it. It smells, yeah, a little bit more peppery, a little bit denser compared to the Luigi Giordano.
Much lower pH soils, high acid, taut, lean, just tighter knit fruit.
Yeah. On the palate, it's like, yeah, it's tenser, it's tighter, it's more tart, it's a little bit like crunchy, still like it's very fresh, like tart fruit, like sort of tart, like wild raspberry, not that tannic. Bright,
and
pretty,
not to cheapen any of that.
it's thirst quenching. It's thirst quenching. It's like structured. It has good acidity. It's not just like a fruity, like easygoing fruit driven wine. But it is like, it's thirst quenching at the same time.
And this is it's such a rarity to have. This is an everyday Gattinara drinker, if you will, and that is so hard to find. I think as excited as we were to be working with the Gattinara, which is current vintage 2011, this is how you can get anyone and everyone into this kind of wine. 250 cases came to the States.
Okay.
And the Giordano, we get about 1,000 cases of that. So nothing we're talking about here is going to exceed that sort of quantity.
Yep. Okay. So how about Angelo Negro, Roero, or Longe Nebbiolo?
Cool. I'm gonna grab the screen again. So if you look back to this map here, the Roero is just across the river. So here's Barbaresco, here's Barolo, and here's the Roero. And I think of it still as like the wild west of southern Piedmont. You can roll through the Roero and still find these verdant stretches, these swaths of forest, strawberry fields, peach orchards, much more diverse agriculturally, and also still an amazing value for Nebbiolo. It's wild to me how undiscovered it still feels. If you cross that river, you're making a big shift. So that sort of structure that I was talking about before, calcareous soils, heavy, rich clay-based soils, limestone. When you hop on the other side of the Roero, especially on the western flank of the Roero, or the other side of the river to the Roero, and on the western flank of the Roero, you'll find soils that look like this: sandy and super fossil laden. These are the youngest, sandiest soils in all of Piedmont. And if you look in the right, like in a very specific place, zoom out here. If you look just to the western flank of the Roero, you'll notice this river, the Tonero here. Well, it used to run right about here, if you can see my cursor. And so over tens of thousands of years, this started 500,000 years ago, that river shifted And in the wake of this alluvial shift, this sort of mix up, it churned all this sand and seashell and dumped it in 3 main villages on the western side of the Roero. And Negro's in one of those. So you're tasting Nebbiolo rooted in that sort of soil. And what that makes for is much finer tannin. When I think of it as like much less coarse sandpaper, on that side of the river, and these really pretty perfumed floral aromatics in a lot of cases. This is, do you have the 2018, Ned?
2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this is 100% Nebbiolo. It's always 100% Nebbiolo. In 19, they sourced most of their fruit from the Roero, and then they have a little holding in Barbaresco. So you're getting like a little bit of a bonus there, a little bit of Barbaresco fruit in Angeline. Personally, I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that if you're trying to train your palate on Nebbiolo and you're pulling Langhe Nebbiolo off the shelves or ordering it at restaurants, you're not even necessarily getting 100% Nebbiolo. And that is a frustration of ours as an importer. The zone doesn't require it. So again, just bear in mind when you're tasting Langhe Nebbiolo and the color looks a little funny, it doesn't look like the way I described it. Maybe they cut it with some Barbera or Dolcetto or Fresa. That's okay, I guess, but it doesn't give you this sort of pure, direct understanding of Nebbiolo in all of its sort of transcendence. Mostly stainless. They do something kind of interesting where they take like 80% of the fruit and they put it in stainless, and then they take 20% and they put it in old botti in those large wood barrels, and then they blend it at the end. So you're getting some wine that's seen a bit more oxygen than others, but all very neutral vessels to give you again that sort of clean, bright profile. The family, quickly, I should mention them. They've been around for a minute. I love this photo because it was like mom told everyone to wear blue that day, 1670 is when this winery got its start. This guy over here, Giovanni Negro, is known as Mr. Arnaz. I know that Devonish has some in-house as well. That's what they hang their hat on. They do 7 different bottlings. He was the first to ferment dry Arnaz. But the Nebbiolo has become increasingly important as that sort of balance of power has shifted over the years. Nebbiolo is what you make your money on in Piedmont, of course. And then all the kids are involved. So you've got Angelo Negro up front here. He's the guy whose name is on the bottle. And as is the custom in Piedmont, they skip a generation with the first name in a lot of cases. So his grandfather's name was also Angelo. And that is, he's the namesake of this bottle. Angeline means little Angelo, and his grandfather weighed in at like 300 pounds in his latter years. So it's a bit tongue in cheek. A lot of Tyrene was had. Ned, what do you smell?
It's really pretty. The aroma of this is gorgeous. This is more like floral and perfumed. It smells like maraschino cherries in a really like nice, pretty way, actually. Yeah, like yeah, there's a little, it smells very pretty. It's like really pretty, elegant, like raspberry, strawberry, but there's also this little bit of like bitter, astringent, like red licorice, or like a little bit of the smell of like Campari or something, like hidden in there. But it's a really this is a beautiful aroma. This is really like pretty aromatic.
I've yet to taste a vintage from them where the tannin wasn't super well integrated, and that for me is really important. If you think about this as a lifelong education, and you're training folks to start in the Rosso realm, jump into Langhe Nebbiolo, not scare them away, and then ease them into Barbaresco and Barolo. This for me is really powerful because of how well they manage the tannin. And a lot of that is what they do in the cellar, but some of it is just the fact that they're dealing with like the closest you can get to Kimmeridgian soils in Piedmont.
Yeah, the tannins are there. Like it's not like it's not tannic, or like the tannins aren't lacking at all. It's just that the tannins are really sort of integrated and just balance the wine. The tannins aren't like one of the driving components of it. It's got some nice tension to it. It's got some good acidity.
Yeah, and I feel like what you just said, that's the linchpin, right? Like we talk about how there's Nebbiolo that comes from other parts of the world, but often I just end up, not always, but often if I'm tasting like an Australian or an American Nebbiolo, I end up thinking like, oh, that was really acidic, or that was really tannic, or that was really fruit forward. So the ability to sort of fold it all together, I think that's the ineffable part,
Yeah. With this, I mean, like it's 2019, so it's young, and it does taste young. Like it tastes kind of tightly wound, but the tannins aren't like, they're not too aggressive, which I think is impressive. But what really, for me, what makes the wine like awesome, what really makes it delicious, you taste the acidity, you taste this tart, like sort of like tight, small, like red berry fruit, and you get the tannins, but again, there's this like tasty, savory saltiness to it in the mid palate, and like back there just before the tannins, and that balances out the acidity in the tannins. And I feel like the salt, like the salinity, again, it's not obvious and in your face, but it's what really makes the wine like really delicious and work really well. But yeah. And then so for Cantina del Glicine, I actually still have the 2014. I don't know if I told you that, or that I had some. I also have 2016, but I used 2014 for this because I figured, why not? I might as well use 2014 for this taste.
I just had all that recently. It's drinking really well.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'll share a few more photos. So yeah, we're just hopping over the river again, back into Barbaresco. There's a better map I can show you now that we're focused just on this area. So 1890s, as I mentioned before, the first time anyone thought to produce, basically the co-op of Barbaresco was the first to produce Barbaresco made of 100% Nebbiolo, and it certainly didn't look like this back then. This is a relatively recent map that shows you a breakdown of the MGAs in Barbaresco. There's 66 MGAs or crus. That's all we have at this point. I think there's a real debate to be had about Grand Cru versus Premier Cru, and we might even head that way one day, but this is kind of what we have at this point. And it's remarkable to think like that's happened in the course of about 100 years. We've come a long way. The oldest way, before anyone was talking about Cru or MGA, was to pull the best fruit you could grow from any given vineyard sources in your village, throw them in the same vessel, co-ferment the fruit and produce a wine and call it Barbaresco. That is what Roberto Bruno did in 2014. It's what he always did with Vigna Sparse. It's really an homage to that original idea of let's just pull the best fruit we can grow and make one Classico is our way of referring to that. In his case, he was the purest, most visionary winemaker I've experienced in Piedmont. He was obsessed with calling this Vigna Sparse, and even having it trademarked, which I love. So this means sparse or scattered vineyards. And they are in the old town of Neve. I have to say, from a sentimental standpoint, opening these bottles and tasting them is a big deal for me. He died in 2018 after having produced over 50 vintages. And his style is so textbook, old school Piemonte, Barbaresco, this sort of high-toned, pure, pretty, floral, but fiercely, uniquely Neve tannin on these wines. The old town of Neve is a super special place, one of 3 villages that make up the zone. You can see it's effectively built as a fort to protect itself from the barbarians at one point. And then this is a good idea of where you're tasting from. Roberto was this amazing character. His partner, Roberto and his partner never married, which is wild in Piedmont, you know, given all the Catholic influence. But he and Adriana were from Piedmont, but left in the 60s, radical hippies, tripped around places like Afghanistan and the Congo, and then came back in the 70s and bought Cantina d'Aglicine, which means cellar of the wisteria. And they occupy the oldest known cellar in Barbaresco. It goes back to the 1400s, 1492. And this is the entryway. So you can see these barrels that I've been talking about. These are old school, 25, 30, 35-year-old Slavonian botti. That's where this wine lives for 2 years. And then there's the man. I couldn't find a picture that would sum it up better. Super serious, uncompromising in his view of how Barbaresco ought to show itself. The approach was regimented. I think the vintages always spoke for themselves when it was the hand of Roberto at the winery, but it was always, you know, first into stainless, then primary occurred in concrete. He was a big fan of délestage, did it rigorously, did it daily, even as a 70-year-old dude. And then it ages for 2 full years in neutral botti, which is 2 years beyond, 15 months beyond the minimum. So minimum is now 9 months. That has been shortened legally over the last few years. And I think it's possible and even probable to have a lot of Barolo and Barbaresco on the market that's just not ready to drink. So the fact that they would kind of hold these wines back a bit longer and allow them to oxygenate in wood for longer, I think is a key to these bottlings being more approachable, even though they're not super old, you know?
Yeah, well, it looks like the old school style. Like this is the color of it. Like you can see through it. It's more like brown, orangey in color. Like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it bricky, but it has that like orange tinge around the edges of it.
Yeah.
And the aroma
Go ahead.
is like it's floral and it's pretty, but it's not like super fruit driven. Like there's more like savory, sort of like woodsy.
There's always like there's a distinct kind of herbal profile too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something that reminds me, there's something that makes me think of like seared pork. Like there's something about it that smells kind of like meaty and gamey and fatty. And it's a beautiful aroma, but this aroma is old school Nebbiolo to me. That's not young, that's not fruit driven, just that's not exclusively fruit, that has all of these other like more savory flavors and components to it.
I guess this is a good time to mention why I think Barbaresco is so special. You know, it's a third the size of Barolo. The output is similar. The history is about 40 years shorter, but these wines are remarkable. I think that Barbaresco often yields Nebbiolo of greater balance and poise and sort of youthful prettiness than Barolo. but it gets a fraction of the attention. So we're always, trying to push Barbaresco, not at the expense of Barolo, but I think it's just part of the fact is that it came second, and it's always played a bit of second fiddle to Barolo, and it really shouldn't. The soils are a bit more delicate. The microclimate is a bit cooler. It lends itself to really pretty Nebbiolo.
The fruit at the front is really pretty and elegant. It's like more of that like cherry sort of like raspberry fruit. But then the wine like transitions, or it pivots partway through, and on the mid palate suddenly I get more like chocolate and like roasted mushroom and stuff like that. Like the mid palate and the back of the mid palate suddenly get really both not just savory flavors, but it also is like rich and like deep and like broader and like sort of more muscular, like way more so than the aroma, and way more so than like the fruit, how like bright and fresh and pretty and elegant the fruit at the beginning of the wine sort of leads you to believe. I love wines that do that. Like to me, this is more like complex and sort of like cerebral and intellectual, like in a really good positive way. Like it's a delicious wine that has a lot of complexity to it.
How would you describe the tannin?
The tannins, I would call them firm, present. Like they're an important integral part of the wine, but they are, and they are like real. They're tannins that you feel and that linger, but they sort of like draw the wine out, and I feel like they're actually softer than the tannins on the Angelo Negro Roero. Like they're a little bit more polished and a little bit more integrated even than those. And those were soft or like integrated tannins. So these like the tannins are here and they do a perfect job of like holding together the wine and the finish and like drawing it out and shutting down the savoriness from the mid palate. And they would be sort of like just exactly what you want to go with food, to go with like pasta or something like that, or some like a seared like boneless like pork loin or something like that. But they are impressively like elegant.
Yeah, that's something to keep in mind. The more I study Barbaresco, the more I realize that each of these villages is quite a bit different. Just to point out on this map, we call this area the Langhe. Quite literally, someone with a vivid imagination saw these as the tongues, the foothills sort of reaching and swooping down off the Alps. And each of these villages has its own langa, its own set of tongues or ridges or hillsides. And as you move farther northeast into Neve, the structure of the soil becomes much greater. And so when you pull fruit from the eastern side of the Neve, you're dealing with what I think of as like creeper tannins. But the beauty of Vigna Sparse is the fruit came from here, from Serabuela, from here, Galina, and from here, Serra Capelli. So he's like, it's like Roberto was cooking with very different ingredients, three very different crews. And I think that's the reason you don't feel just the sort of force or the muscularity of the eastern side of the village. So.
Cool.
Numero
5. And so for this, actually, I am going to, how do I go back to being host? Let's see. Don't want to do that. Because I'm going to hijack this and go to Valtellina now.
Oh, right. I'll mute myself here.
How do I? I don't know if I can actually take, I don't know if I can take screen share back from Cameron. Well, all right, anyway. So Valtellina, so this is not actually Piedmont. This is from just over the border from Piedmont in Lombardy. And well, when Cameron comes back, I'm gonna get screen share back here. But I'll use this map right there. So you have, like, what we've been talking about is everything down in here. And then Valtellina is way over up here, right up against the border with Switzerland. And if you can see, like, look, so the wine region is just this long, it just follows the river there. It's just this super, it's the Adda River. And so the appellation, it's extremely steep hillsides, terraced vineyards overlooking the river Adda. It's Nebbiolo, but they call it Chiavanesca here. And you can see this is even more pale than the Barbaresco, I think was. This was one of the ones that, like, in those little sample bottles was, you could see right through it.
Ned, are you, sorry, I ran to grab a FedEx wine delivery. Are you able to share now?
I don't think so. I think, looking at it, I think you have to, like, relinquish being host in order for me to.
Well, I changed it to multiple participants can share.
Okay.
See if it works now.
Here we go. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. So this is pictures, and then that's Pier Paolo. That's one of the two guys who makes it. And so it's a pair of friends who sort of, like, they knew each other. They were friends as little kids. Then they, like, went off, did other things. Then they both ended up studying winemaking at university and reconnected sort of over that. And when they got out of university, they decided to work together to start a winery, because neither of them had come from a winemaking family, so they didn't inherit vineyards. So they pooled their resources to purchase and rent some existing old vineyards, because there isn't a whole lot of, like, spare land here in Valtellina that you can plant, because that's what the vineyards look like. They're extremely steep. That's inside the winery. There, see, like, it looks similar to, like, winemaking in some parts of Germany on the Mosel, where you have this river valley down here, and then you have these extremely steep hillsides coming down to the river, and you have vineyards planted up on them that are very exposed. So this is high elevation, cooler temperatures. I think pretty much all of the vineyards are all south facing. I don't think there are northern facing vineyards here, because you just don't get enough, you don't get enough sun to really properly fully ripen things. Nebbiolo grapes. But Valtellina is another Nebbiolo region that is, like, slowly putting itself back together, or, like, slowly building more of a reputation. And the wines from here, because they're exposed, high elevation, because it's windier, cooler, they're very aromatic, very, like, pretty, like, floral expressions of Nebbiolo. And the soil there, so the soil there is, like, rocky, sandy, moraine soil. That valley was formed by the glaciers receding. So it's like alluvial soil, but less sandy. It's soil, it's stuff, it's matter that was deposited by glaciers either as they went through or as they retreated. And so that's it's a mix of all kinds of different rocks and stuff deposited there by the glacier. Smell, it's another like more like cherry sort of dominated smell, like fresh cherries, dark ripe raspberries, really pretty floral, not particularly like spicy or herbal smelling. On the palate though, it's got more structure. Like on the palate, there's more tannic structure. And it's got fruit that's actually like vaguely, well, there's flavors that are sort of, to me, vaguely chocolatey in like the mid palate and the finish. It opens with sort of tart cherry, but then pretty quickly gets more savory, more like rich, dark, a little bit sort of like mocha-y. And there's some salt worked in there too. And then it's a pretty long finish. The tannins sort of like pull it out and you keep on getting sort of that like cooked cherry and mocha flavor like all the way through it. But it's definitely, it's a like, the wines that I've had from Valtellina, the Nebbiolos, like they're a little bit different from all of the Nebbiolos that I've had from Barolo, Barbaresco. They're a little bit more like, the aromatics are different to them. All right. And then onto the Barolo.
Barolo sounds good. We have these official maps now for Barolo and Barbaresco. I don't know if you can read that. Enogia, Barolo, DOCG. So this map shows you. I'll open it super quickly. It's an incredibly detailed map done by this dude named Alessandro Masnaghetti, and it shows you all 161 MGAs in Barolo. But what I love about how Ned has framed this whole tasting is the history goes much further back. And I pulled this up today. I hadn't looked at this in a while. This is before there was Masnaghetti, before there was Enogia, there was Renato Ratti doing his work. And he put out this map. He worked on this map in the late 60s, early 70s. This is before any fully formed idea of what cru meant, what great cru meant versus a mediocre cru. But what he did was he identified these top crus, what he called first category. And you'll see, just to point out, this might be kind of hard to see, but in the village of Castiglione Folletto, there is a really long cru, which I'm trying to point to right there, and it's called Roque de Castiglione. And then we're on the 2014, right, Ned?
Yep, we are.
So you're tasting, there's a ton of history in that cru. It's this cru that stretches, well, actually, I should share my screen. How about that? Cru that stretches about 1.5 kilometers. You can see here the soil type. I mean, this is a 200-foot cliff that gives way to a river, and the vineyard is super long and very skinny. So imagine like 60, 70 meters is all you get out of any given little parcel there. And it's highly treacherous. I mean, folks have been injured or even died working it, falling off the cliffside. Every so many years, a row in the vineyard gives way to erosion. So it's a very stark place. It also happens to be one of the first vineyards ever bottled in Vietti. In 1961, Vietti bottled their first bottle of Roque, just called Roque at the time. Now we call it Roque de Castiglione. So historically speaking, no single vineyard Barolo ever put out before that year. So they were right there at the edge of history. And this is a fascinating village because you're staring at one side of it, which is Helvetian soils. So think sand and gravel, very structured soils. And on the other side of the village, where you find vineyards like Villero and Bricoboscis, you'll find Tortonian soils, clay-based soils. So it's impossible to talk about the typicity of the village. It's bisected by a geological fault line, essentially. And you have basically really big names in this vineyard. You have Vietti, Brovia, Odero, another house we work with. And then you have this guy, Claudio Viberti. He's flown under the radar. I just mentioned some of the giants of Barolo, and this guy is very much like cult producer, hadn't even sold wine outside of the States until a few years ago. His dad is the man. This is his dad, Giovanni. He's been managing the vineyards for decades now. They bought these vineyards in 1946, right after World War II. If that's not a Piemontese outfit, I don't know what is. I love this shot. So he's vineyard, and then Claudio has a hand in the vineyard, but is very much like rock star winemaker. I'm going to do 2,000 cases of wine a year, and definitely not smile for this photo that I'm trying to take of you. He is the man. He's producing single vineyard Bricoboscis and single vineyard Roque de Castiglione. These are two of the greatest vineyards in all of Barolo. He's the only producer putting out those two vineyards under one house label, which is called Roque Viberti. The name is pretty straightforward, right? It's his last name, and Roque means cliffs. So his vineyard is quite literally built on the side of a cliff. Amazing dude, all dogmatically organic vineyards in a zone that's not exactly easy to be organic in. He'll tell that story as he tosses like cigarette after cigarette into the vineyard, but that makes it even more charming, right? Old school, so long, deliberate macerations, 40-day macerations, 2 years, 25 months in neutral botti. That's kind of the common thread that runs through our whole import book. Is you're not going to find a lot of barrique aged wines, and that suits this vineyard. If we were talking about one side of the village versus the other, for me, this is some of the most powerful wine in Barolo. There's this sort of wound up tension, this beauty, this purity in Roque that needs time. And I'm glad you're actually a couple vintages behind our inventory, Ned, so that people can start to see that a little bit better. Yeah, I could go on and on. This is personally, it is a couple of our favorite vineyards, and we actually work with two different producers in the vineyard. If we could, we would import all the Roque de Castiglione produced. It's just, I think, the most special site in Barolo.
The aroma is really interesting. The aroma is like, it's like dried cherries, dried rose petals. It's very pretty, but it's an old school, elegant sort of aroma. Kind of woodsy. I mean, it also, yeah, and a tiny bit like woodsy and smoky too.
Yeah, it's always a healthy exercise to factor in the personality of the winemaker, right? There is this certain element of like dark brooding
Yeah.
very serious wines, and that to a certain degree sums up Claudio and his approach to wine and his approach to life.
It's like it's super expressive. It's very like there's like the flavors are not retiring. The flavor like it's like all the flavors are like there's a lot of intensity. There's a lot of tension to the wine. Um, it's got pretty characteristics, but it's also powerful, and there is also like a I don't know. There's also like an aggressive like power sort of component to the wine too.
Yeah, but not in it's fun to contrast that with the Grand Crus on the other side of the village. So it's not as round and rich as like a Villero or a Brico Boscus might be, but the power is lean and focused and driven,
Yeah.
and it all sort of circles back to that thing that we as an importer love, which is it shows amazing tension.
Yeah.
And
This is gritty and serious and aromatic and has like fantastic salinity. Like it's delicious. It's really delicious to drink. It's like it's serious wine that like it means business, that like kind of like it's I have a hard time imagining anybody drinking this wine and like not paying attention to it and just like having this be like something that you drink to be like thirst quenching, or like something that you drink while you're having a conversation with somebody and you can just ignore the wine and not pay attention to it. Like it's a wine that like really grabs your palate and like demands your attention when you drink it.
I'm gonna tuck that away. I mean, I absolutely agree. I've never had a wine from Claudio that took a sort of backseat, you know?
Yeah, it's sort of like it grabs your like it takes you by the arm and like leads you where it wants you to go.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Well, well, I'm trying to think of like I'm trying to think of all the things I forgot to go over as we talked through this. I think one of the things I should mention is like in Barolo and okay, actually, or maybe even this is a question for you. So in Barolo and Barbaresco, there are all of these specific single vineyards. Like there are all of these different denominated, and some of them are official and some of them are not official. Like some of them are just like this is how it's been. Like these vineyards over here, like people call them by this name, and that underlines and like and illustrates how expressive Nebbiolo is of different locations, of like of different exposures and different variations in the soil and stuff like that,
Right.
that these names are really meaningful. They exist for a reason. They evolved sort of organically from the people there just trying to make sense of the land that they were working and farming. And that underlines like what special impressive places Barbaresco and Barolo both are. Um, are you aware of in like Gattinara, like other places of there being locally that same sort of system of individual sort of like vineyard names, or is that something that's more sort of unique to Barolo and Barbaresco?
So there is now, I was looking for, I don't have it right within reach, but there's now an NOGA map for certainly for Gattinara and Gemme,
Yep,
official cruise now, which is an
yep,
amazing. You know, as I hit the road again one day, I can't wait to have a bottle of Gattinara in front of whoever's tasting and be able to point to the specific site, the MGA, and
yep,
then for the Roero as well. So
yep.
that this is super new, 2018. So now I get to go out again in future times and talk to people about Arnaz, which has been bottled dry for over 50 years now, and talk about MGAs, single vineyard bottlings, which is amazing.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like that's something that like to an extent that's a product of Nebbiolo. Like Nebbiolo is expressive and variable depending on where it is and who's making it and stuff like that. And it's also like a demonstration of these places of Barolo, Barbaresco, Gattinara, the Roero, like how varied they are geologically. I'm gonna super quick screen share to where, here we go. So this is a topographical map of Barolo, and I'm looking forward. Okay, so down here, so that line down here is 2 kilometers. And so like Barolo is not a big place, but you look at these crazy ridge lines and how broken up all of this land is. And you know, I feel like that.
And there's Roque and Valero right there, just to point them out.
But that's like, you know, it's a place where it's a complicated geological place where you need to like really drill down into like, you know, every 100 feet, you know, the wine may taste different. And that's something else that, like, that's another comparison, another thing that these wines have in common with Burgundy, with Pinot Noir from Burgundy. And then also with Mount Etna that we were talking about a couple weeks ago, Mount Etna and Nerella Mascalese, where like the topography of Mount Etna is like that. It's similarly complicated and all broken up. And you have this same system of little specific vineyard names that just evolved there organically from the people trying to figure out and put a name to all of the differences that they were tasting as they farmed the land.
And then to preview what you're doing next week, how do we do that in a thoughtful way that doesn't result in more Grignolino and more Fraisen and more Barbera and more Dolcetto being ripped out and replanted with Nebbiolo? How do we keep all those historically great grapes celebrated? And because that's my concern with this conversation, even though it's an amazing one to be having.
Well, luckily Piedmont is a big place. So yep. Piedmont is a big place with a lot of room for all of those different grapes. And, you know, and then also, you know, not everybody, most people can't afford to drink Barolo or Barbaresco every day. There's a, you know, the market, the invisible hand of the market will keep on raising the price of Barolo and Barbaresco so that it won't, hopefully so that it won't just take over Piedmont. The only time that I've been in Barolo, we drove through the town of Barolo on a wine trip and pulled over to the side of the road so everybody else could take pictures of the castle of Barolo. And I don't think I took a picture of the castle, but as we were looking at it, I saw like $250,000 worth of cars drive by in like 40 seconds. I saw like a turbo Porsche SUV, a turbo 911, and then like a Mercedes AMG like S-Class drive by, you know, and it was like, oh yeah, that's like whatever, $300,000 worth of cars just drove by and like one after the other here in Barolo. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what Barolo is, right?
And you
New Barolo today. In a
yeah,
way.
you wouldn't have even seen that, 15, 20 years ago. You'd be much less likely to see that in 40 seconds at least. So,
right. Yeah. So anyway, cool. That's thanks a lot for doing this, Cameron. Thank you everybody for watching this and going through and tasting these wines. I will see you all next week, in which I will do Piedmont, not Nebbiolo. I'll just try to do everything else that is awesome and delicious and coming out of Piedmont. So
love it.
Cool.
Love it. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks a lot. Bye.